A year ago, we were talking about the new big three in inverted commas: Sabalenka, Rybakina, Swiatek. She beat all three of those players, and she did it all on her own terms.
Hey, tennis fans, I'm Ben Lewis.
And I'm Mike McIntyre.
And you're listening to Matchpoint Canada. Hey, tennis fans, you are listening to Matchpoint Canada. So happy to be back. After the Australian Open, we have a new women's singles champion in Madison Keys, Jannik Sinner defending his title, Mike, and another great guest for episode 4.
Absolutely. Our guest this week is a respected tennis commentator who's been a correspondent for the BBC, Eurosport, and Tennis TV, among others. She returns to chat with us on the podcast a day after her birthday, and while still undoubtedly fighting the jet lag from her time in Melbourne, Abigail Johnson, welcome back to Matchpoint Canada.
Thank you. I was not expecting the birthday shout out at all. I did not know that was out there, but thank you.
I'd like to pretend that I knew that off the top of my head, but Twitter gave me a little bit of help on that one.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting. I didn't know I had that setting on. But yeah, I celebrated my birthday on a long haul flight to LA because I'm here this week for Tennis Channel. So I cannot complain. It's a good purpose of flight. It's the first time I will say that I've done a couple of long haul trips within the span of 5 days. So my body doesn't quite know what I'm doing to it right now, but all for a worthy cause. Amazing. I think it was 2.5 weeks I was in Melbourne because I was there for qualifying week of the Australian Open as well as a week and a half of main draw. And just feel fortunate to have been around the tennis at the start of the year and have a lot more great tennis to call over the next couple of weeks.
Well, we're super excited to talk to you about it. And hey, let's talk about Madison Keys right off the top, who probably many of us didn't have on our short list of contenders, serious contenders for the first major of the year. Been a while since we've sort of had her in that mix, but what allowed her to finally get over this hurdle to get that first major title, and what can we take from the unlikely victory? And I should also say the very enjoyable victory. I think it's fair to say that many of us, not that we root for players match in, match out, but she's one of the good ones for sure.
You could not help but feel happy for her. And I think part of that was, as you say, just what a personable player she is and the way she treats people and the respect that she has. And she's definitely earned that respect for herself, but also just the way she walked the talk in Melbourne. She'd said, look, I've been in big matches in the past and I've not played the way I should have played in order to win, and was very vulnerable in talking about the regrets that she'd had from those situations. And obviously the most prominent was the US Open semi-final in 2023 when she was in tears in her post-match press conference after the loss. It was love 6-7-6, 7-6 to Aryna Sabalenka. And that was my lasting vision of Madison Keys. That was actually what I mentally saw whenever anyone mentioned her name after that, which, rightly or wrongly of me, that was kind of where she stayed for me. That, she, after several years after getting to the US Open final for the first time, she'd worked her way back up to that position, and that was how it had ended. I'm going to hold my hands up. Someone name dropped her in the commentary green room. I was doing World Feed commentary in Melbourne, and it was probably, I'm going to say maybe at the end of week 1, and someone said Madison Keys is playing well as a kind of a suggestion to win. And I said, no, I don't trust Keys. She crumbles at the back end. And that was just the reputation that she's developed for me. Shame on me for putting that tag on her and not giving her the opportunity to lift that the way she gave it to herself. She just had such clear vision on where it had gone wrong in the past and how to put that to rights. And no one has ever doubted her ability. I clearly remember when she was coming through as a teenager, and the firepower was off the charts. There was no one on the scene that had that ready strike the way she did. It came so easily to her. And so if the foundation that you need is a mental one, she's gone through all the right steps to create that firmament for herself. She's spoken about therapy, about talking things through with people to be able to produce in those big moments. And my goodness, the big wins she had on the way to that final. It wasn't just the Sabalenka result. A year ago, we were talking about the new big three in inverted commas: Sabalenka, Rybakina, Swiatek. She beat all three of those players, plus Danielle Collins and Alina Svitolina for good measure. And she did it all on her own terms, taking the ball on. With Madison Keys, it's pretty simple. You know, she's a great athlete and she's got herself into good physical condition, but that ball strike that she possesses is the decider of her matches. And it was that one point at the back end against Sabalenka, the off forehand winner, where she fully committed to the shot after fully committing to so many others, including the off forehand 1-2 behind the wide server. That was 30 all, 5 games all. That was when you knew that it was her time. The fact that she was able to produce in that high pressure moment. And that's my monologue on Madison Keys. She walked the talk, is what she did in Melbourne, and fully earned that win.
Well done summing that up. I can see your commentator skills at work there as you started recounting key moments, and no pun intended.
Thank you guys so much for watching us at Matchpoint Canada. If you like our work, follow along, hit the subscribe button below.
Look, it was a very impressive group of players that she had to overcome to hoist this trophy. And of course, in the final match, I think everyone would have understood if she had, wiltered a little bit against Aryna Sabalenka, who all of us thought the three-peat is coming. She's going to join Martina Hingis and Steffi Graf and Monica Seles as a three-peat, consecutive winner in Melbourne. Let's talk about Sabalenka for a second. So, despite coming in second place, do you feel at her age and with her immense weapons as well that Sabalenka has the potential to sort of be mentioned in the same breath as some of those other women I just mentioned, one day?
100%, completely. I expect her to win a slam minimum this season. I expect her to win multiple Grand Slams going forwards. I mean, she, across the board for me, is the clear-cut best player in the world right now. Her skill set is so transferable. Madison Keys is one of the only players on tour that can beat her for firepower. And that was actually why, as much as you have Sabalenka penciled in as the favorite, right, going into the Australian Open because she's won Brisbane and she's won the previous 2 Australian Opens. But she's always been a player where her one zone of danger is when a player can out-hit her. And we did see that in the Brisbane final of last year against Elena Rybakina. She lost that for just winning 3 games herself, ultimately, in that result. So it was on the day, with the confidence that Keys had and the clarity that Keys had in what she needed to do, it was actually a bad matchup for Sabalenka, and I felt that she did well to take it down the wire to the tight 3-setter that it was. Actually, I felt one of the key moments in that match was when Sabalenka didn't break for the second set. I think as much as I felt like it was Keys' time when she saved match point on the way to beating Swiatek, I would have backed whoever was serving first in the deciding set to go all the way, just because then you have that little bit more freedom going after your shots on the return at the back end of the match, as we saw with Keys. Sabalenka stayed in touch magnificently, and I completely understand her disappointment at the end, because it ultimately did then come down to that one point, and she was right in it. So what we also saw from her at moments in that match was the versatility that she's bringing on top of that breathtaking power game that she possesses, to making her that touch more unpredictable. You know, when you've been at the top for as long as she has now, and I'm not just talking world number 1, but also within that top 2, top 3 bracket of players, you're under scrutiny. People are looking for inroads and how they can do damage against you. And so you have to be evolving a little bit as a player and just having more to your repertoire. And the way she has worked on bringing in the drop shot and has that solid backhand slice as well, I think really good for her long-term potential. And this is a woman who had already won, I think it was 6 consecutive Grand Slam semi-final appearances prior to, I can't remember, was it when she withdrew from Wimbledon last year or something around that time?
And yeah, that's
there
right.
We go. Thank you, Ben, keeping me on track there. I am jet lagging. I will say I am jet lagging. But that's across 3 different surfaces, big time events. She's got the Grand Slam mentality, and she's just starting to come through with a little bit of that kind of reading of the game that sometimes she lacked in the early stages, and it was just that kind of big time power play that she was coming through with. She's becoming a smarter player, I feel, and definitely a player that's going to be in that top 1, top 2, top 3 bracket for the foreseeable future. Yeah, absolutely going to rack up more Grand Slam titles as Sabalenka.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think you're highlighting just kind of how extraordinary a final it was. I thought it was an incredible championship match. And you look at the path, as you mentioned, Madison Keys taking out 4 top 10 players en route, first player to do that since Mary Pierce in 1995. Maybe talking about how she fits into the WTA circuit going forward for 2025, beyond winning her first career major title. I found it very interesting. She commented on her ability to now win a major when she stopped stressing and putting that pressure on herself, thinking she had to win one.
Yeah, the mental aspects, again, we see it on varying levels and how that has been a corner turn for Keys. I guess we've also got to mention the fact that she switched her racket, which coincided with the beginning of this year, and she's won Adelaide and she's won the Australian Open. So it shows how tiny things can make big differences because the margins are so small the higher up the rankings you go. Yeah, huge platform for Keys. And we've mentioned that she's got a huge game, which has been transferable across the years. I'm hesitating to make any huge predictions for her from here, just because I think we have such recency bias within the sport. And Sabalenka is someone who knows about what a certain venue and a certain feeling can do for you. You know, she's had maybe a couple of years ago really good run in Australia, and other players. Iga Swiatek loves the clay, and last season not the best season by her standards, but was still tearing it up across the clay. So situational things are massive in terms of storylines and these, I guess, fairy tale weeks of competition. Madison Keys is a player with a lot of experience behind her. So can she continue to produce, and can she have more big moments? There's 100% the potential for that. But I'm also someone who in the past has said, oh yeah, incredible Australian Open win for Sophia Kenin. Of course she can win more Grand Slams, and that hasn't happened. You know, so I definitely have that at the back of my mind when I'm making predictions, and I tend to just be a little bit more cautious if what I'm going off is a handful of weeks rather than a handful of months or a handful of years. So really impressed with the work that Keys has done, but step by step from here is all I'm going to say.
Good point. Before we shift to the men's side, I do want a quick follow-up just on Iga Swiatek, because it's a semifinals exit, but I think if you look at the body of work here in Melbourne, especially that first week, those dominant wins and losing 10-8 in a third set tiebreak to Keys, I thought she's playing, some of her best tennis, particularly on hard courts that we've seen in a couple of years. I don't know your perspective.
No, I agree. I really do. And for me, there is still a big difference between an Iga Swiatek who is front running and a Swiatek who is being kept close or who is chasing, as we saw at the US Open last year when she lost to Jessica Pegula, and she can get flustered. And it was that one forehand miss that ultimately that cost her against Madison Keys. So those tight moments are the really telling moments in the areas that Swiatek and her team have really got to dig into in terms of how do we handle ourselves and what are our plays, what are we doing in those situations, because she has no issue as a player who's kind of found her groove on the court. She's very difficult, and Keys did a brilliant job of pegging her back, because she is very difficult to do that. I think as well there is a lot to be taken from how close she kept that match against Keys, because some of the tennis that Keys was playing was just on another level, like astronomical levels of control of the kind of pace that she was generating and the repeated point construction that she was coming through with. So as an overview, I think really positive for Swiatek, because that's where we're looking now, right? She is a clay court force, and she's been in a little bit of danger the past year of that's what she's going to become, the clay court force, rather than the player across the board that we know she can be. She's already the holder of a Grand Slam title on hard courts. So to come through with that kind of tennis at her least successful major outside of Wimbledon, which is always going to be a bit of an anomaly as being in the tiny grass court season window, a lot to take from the last couple of weeks, I think, for the Swiatek camp.
Hey, if I was a professional tennis player and they labeled me as a clay court, dominant, I would take that. I would take the one surface and just run with it. Like, if we could be the best clay court podcast out there, I would take that title. It's
podcast specialist. Yeah.
Why not? Why get greedy? Hey, if we shift over to the men's side, and I feel like the women's side took a little bit of the attention, and I know I was more wrapped up in the storyline watching Madison Keys sort of build momentum as she kept knocking off these big players. But on the men's side, we have a repeat champion, Jannik Sinner, who's establishing himself as a legitimate force moving forward. Alcaraz went out a little bit earlier than he would have liked, of course, coming up against an informed Djokovic, who, really sad to see him have to go out the way that he did. I would have loved to have seen that match against Zverev play out in 5 sets or best of 5 sets. What for you on the men's side was your big takeaway, and sort of summing up, if you would, on that side of things, how the Aussie Open played out this year for the men?
Oh, it's quite a tough question because obviously it's such a huge event with so many kind of smaller storylines, and the first week was a completely different story, I guess, with some of those breakout stories to the second week, because it was really, I guess, the younger guns that were taking the headlines in week 1 of the competition. I think as an overview, huge once again, Jannik Sinner was a lot of people's default pick to win the event just because they didn't know where else to go, and the fact that
same here, I think, for both of us, yeah.
Right. The fact that people are falling on him as the default, a guy that only won his first major tournament exactly a year ago, that says huge amounts about his reliability and his consistency across the board. He's just won the last 3 hard court Grand Slams, having come into last season looking for that first major title. I think he's normalized there something that's quite extraordinary, because he ultimately did break through very quickly, but he has just become such a reliable presence. And it's been... Sinner's really impressive to me because he didn't burst onto the scene. My acknowledgement of Carlos Alcaraz as a force in the game was completely different to my acknowledgement of Jannik Sinner. Alcaraz was that immediate wow factor of, look at what he has in his arsenal, look at how he's stitching all the pieces together, big win here, big win there. Sinner was he 0-12 against top 5 players at the beginning of his career? It might have been even more than that. He took a long time to fit together the pieces of the puzzle and get to where he is now. And it's been marginal gains for him season by season. I was having a good look at his first serve numbers, because that for me is a hugely improved part of his game. Since he broke into the top 10 in 2021, coming through to now, he's winning 10% more of his first serves. So he's just improved that 2% season by season. And that's massive when it comes to the crunch moments and being up against those break points and having confidence in what you're able to do off the ground. The forehand over the last couple of years has become more of a weapon. He's found the balance in rallies, the tolerance of those rallies, rather than just kind of leaning one way or the other, either being a little too passive or going for too much. He's an incredible amount of balance and security that Sinner has found. Like it was not a staggering final victory, right? Alexander Zverev did not rise to expectations, but there was a steady presence on the other side of the net to take advantage of that. And steady Sinner. That's my takeaway. I think my big takeaway from the Australian Open, just how dependable he already is at the age of 23.
Well, we like to claim here in Canada that we gave him that confidence because it was a year and a half ago when he won his first Masters 1000 in Toronto.
Right.
And I remember watching him in practice. Whenever he'd hit one of the targets on serve practice, Darren Cahill would have to drop and do 10 push-ups. So maybe that gave him the motivation to up the first serve percentage. I don't know, just throwing that out there. But I want to shift and ask you a question about Novak. Really unfortunate to see him go out that way. But I want to ask more about the coaching partnership, the early returns perhaps of working with Andy Murray, and also what the reaction was like in the UK. I mean, you can speak to that better than we can, of course. What were people's reactions when they heard these two great players would be teaming up to partner together for this season?
Well, this is really funny. I found out in Slovakia. I was actually traveling with a British player, and I was at dinner with a couple of the Brits, and it was pure shock. And I'm not someone that gets really taken aback by tennis world is a crazy world, right? Things happen, results happen that are maybe a little bit unexpected, and you can learn to expect the unexpected. But this was so left field. Yeah, you just I wouldn't have dreamed it up. Huge excitement, I'm sure, on the British scene. And yeah, it was everywhere. I was commentating for BBC 5 Live during the first week of the Australian Open, as well as TV. And when we were calling Novak Djokovic matches, there was as much interest in what Murray was doing in the courtside seat as what Djokovic was doing on the court. I mean, it felt like once in a lifetime. And I think that's why Andy was there, having just retired and having just been on a holiday with his family, his wife and 4 kids, just knowing that Novak's time is short. He's in his late 30s and he is not the force that he was even 18 months ago. And yeah, I can't remember the initial question. I'm not going to lie, Mike, but
that's okay. Your reaction. I mean, you're giving us that legit reaction here. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a shock. It was a surprise. And I think it was something that everyone has thoroughly enjoyed while not knowing kind of the long-term purpose and potential of it. I don't know that anyone saw it seriously kind of going far beyond the Australian Open. For me, just my own perspective on it, I feel like Djokovic is at a very different point in his career than he was even midway through the 2023 season. Would dearly love Grand Slam title number 25, but knows that it's going to take something different. It's going to take something special. It's going to take more than he actually has in him, I think, right now on a day-to-day basis. I mean, what he did at the Olympics, I think, didn't do a good job of measuring expectation for him across the board, because that was phenomenal what he achieved in Paris last year. He was a guy who'd been ill, he'd been injured, he had this one goal that he'd not ticked off his bucket list, and he channeled everything to make that happen and competed with a discipline and a level that was just extraordinary, not just for the occasion, but for the position that he was in at the time. But that was a best of 3 set tournament. Mm-hmm. With the continued physical knocks that he is getting, it's hard for me to envision, and I would never say never because he's Novak Djokovic, undisputed, one of the greatest sports people the world has ever seen. So there are different rules sometimes, but the injuries and the illnesses that he is consistently getting is a natural part of aging. And it's very hard It's very hard to hold up for 2 weeks of best of 5 set tennis now. I felt like Murray was there in Melbourne because that was the big shot for Djokovic. Let's get a little bit of something different in here. Let's put everything into this the same way I put everything into Paris. That's the court where he's won 10 times previously. There was a lot on the line for him there. And it's not off the table, but I think this was always going to be a big indicator, if it wasn't a title run, of what is possible for him further down the line.
Yeah, I will say it felt like there was a lot of kind of ambiguity in that final press conference for Novak Djokovic. He didn't commit to continuing on with Andy Murray, sort of saying, well, we have to have that conversation. And I hate to say you don't want to forecast, but it does feel like the end is coming up. And I do wonder if maybe this is the final year. You look at his last few Grand Slams, as you mentioned, French Open, the knee injury, and he had to withdraw there. Wimbledon, where maybe he wasn't 100%. The U.S. Open, where I think he was fatigued and lost to Popper in there, and then injuries again. His level is still incredibly high on the tennis court, but is this maybe a bit of a product of father time, just allowing the body to recover physically? Sort of, as you mentioned, it's best of 5 in these Grand Slams. Like, his ball striking can maybe get him through some matches, but can his body do it?
Yeah, you've said it there, Ben. No one loses the ability to play great tennis. They lose the ability to facilitate great tennis. And we've seen that with Roger Federer. We've seen that with Rafael Nadal. We've even seen that with Andy Murray, who's now in the courtside box there. This is what Djokovic is dealing with right now. You don't just wake up and you can't hit your forehand or your backhand anymore one day. That's not how it works. There is a natural end to everything. And for Djokovic, it's about getting as much out of the between times as he can, because there are going to be these physical and health setbacks that crop up with more regularity, as we've seen. I think for me, the Riley Opelka match in Brisbane was a very good one for measuring expectations for him, because that pace of ball from Opelka and the freedom that he played with, because Djokovic has lost a little bit of that locker room aura that he had at the peak of his powers. Yeah. I felt like that really exposed the fact that Djokovic has lost half a step. He was consistently being rushed into his forehand side, and on that day, he didn't have the answers to the free flowing power that Opelka came through with, and that was quite significant to me, because that's the makeup of player that Djokovic would always end the tournament of in years gone by, because he's the greatest returner the game has ever seen. So those big servers who were racking up all the free points against other opposition, they'd meet the end of the road at Novak Djokovic. And just the fact that Djokovic, look, it was his first tournament of the season, but he's gone down there in straight sets. That was quite telling to me in terms of where struggles might be for him further down the line. And it just kind of consolidated to me that, the physicality is dropping bit by bit, because he is so great, and because of what he did in Paris as well. You do second guess and ask those questions. I think a good match for kind of being realistic with where he is at, while we still leave the space for what is possible and what he could maybe do. He is still a human being who is going to have to compete within human confines.
My last question for you. I think the bar has been raised, understandably so, in Canada in terms of what our Canadian athletes can do, based on, of course, prior success we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I sense, at least, Mike, maybe you feel it too, a bit of frustration is kind of creeping in from Canadian tennis fans. Maybe we're greedy, or expectations are just higher now.
We want more. We want more.
Exactly. And unfortunately, you look at the singles side, we didn't have an athlete reach the second week. Leylah Fernandez did make the third round. Another early exit for Felix Auger-Aliassime. Do you see any reason maybe for optimism for 2025, any positives to kind of lean into, to tell us maybe, Felix gets his level back, or maybe Dennis is moving in the right direction, or maybe the Canadian women as well?
And not to put pressure, but if you don't answer this correctly, you may not be coming back for a while. So.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Completely valid. I think, Auger-Aliassime and Shapovalov have both had their struggles of late. I feel with someone with a ball strike like Shapovalov, you can only stay down for so long. Like there is space for him to build into. For Auger-Aliassime, I think there have been more positives recently. It's tough. It kind of comes in waves, and I think you've even seen that with Canadian tennis. And Leylah Fernandez had her big US Open run pretty soon off the back of Bianca Andreescu having her phenomenal 2019 season. Shapovalov and Auger-Aliassime were kind of coming up around the same time, and You do feed off that energy, and I guess that inspiration, that healthy competition from other players. Saw it massively in Great Britain. I think they called it the Raducanu effect when she had that incredible US Open run, and then Katie Boulter had a really big breakthrough shortly after that. The Brits have all spoken about the British tournaments during lockdown and being able to train with each other and be around the bigger names of the sport. Andy Murray, Joe Conter at the time, Kyle Edmund, Cam Norrie were both doing what they were doing at that point in time. And you really do, as a player, feed off that competitive energy, which just maybe hasn't been at a peak for the Canadians as of late, but it only takes one or two to set that standard for everyone else to kind of start coming with it as well. I truly believe that it does come in waves when you're not from a USA or a France that are just stockpiling talent, because there's always something going on there. For maybe slightly smaller tennis nations, it just doesn't always come through as consistently. But you have some promising younger players as well. Aryna Sabalenka is out there making moves on the women's side and pushing. And even on the older end of the scale, I was really pleased for Rebecca Marino doing what she was doing at the back end of last year. She's a player who, she's got the big serve and she's got the big weapons, and picks up a couple of bigger titles at the back end of the season that she's really been working towards. And shout out to her, because she's just a lovely human being and really great to be around at tournaments. So whether it's young or old, I think there's definitely some potential in there. And when it happens for one or two, it might happen for a few more as well.
Okay, I think that answer will do. Do I get thumbs up from Ben as well on this?
Yeah, I approve of that. Yeah, very good.
You did your homework. You did a good job there. You dug deep and mentioned Marino and Stakusic. That's admirable. And hey, just like when I get called to talk on TalkSport over in the UK, I go down and do my homework as well. And clearly, you've been doing that. So thanks again, Abigail. It's terrific stuff. And look, you got to agree to come back on again this year. I think recently we've had you on a once a year sort of basis, and it's just not enough. So can we get you to commit to a second appearance this season?
Yeah, I will try and not be jet lagged for the next one. That will be the goal, and would love to come on again this season. Thank you guys. It is always a pleasure, and appreciate the work you do across the course of the season. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. There she goes, Abigail Johnson, commentator for Tennis Channel, as we say goodbye. And yeah, what a great Australian Open, Mike. I was thrilled to see Madison Keys, I think, win that first career Grand Slam title. I know we had the discussion kind of leading in of some of the best players to not win a major title, and she was like right up on my list, probably alongside Aryna Sabalenka, who ironically they played each other in a tough 3-set match.
I know. And, I was thinking before that match took place, like, whoever comes out of this, could this be it? Could this be the, momentum builder and get them, although with Keys, you looked at who she had to play still. And I was like, I got to be honest, I wasn't giving her a chance to get through Swiatek and Sabalenka. Svitolina, I still think Svitolina could have her moment. I know she, took time off to start a family, but she seems as committed as ever and has had some pretty solid results since coming back. I still think that, there's a chance for her to follow in Madison Keys' footsteps. And overall, the Aussie Open didn't disappoint for me, although I got to say, I'm glad it's over. I'm sure many tennis fans feel the same in North America, that we can get our sleep schedules back on like a regular rhythm right now.
Yeah, no kidding. I was, to be honest, jet lagged is not the word, but 5 to 6 hours sleep days are not ideal, I would say. But nevertheless, great Australian Open. Congrats to Jannik Sinner for winning consecutive major titles, which was an incredible result. We want to introduce something new this week, a Match Point Canada mailbag, and fortunate to get a couple questions or comments as well from listeners, longtime listeners of the show. I'll start with a question from Shauna and get your thoughts, Mike. Shauna asks, which player has the best shot of stopping Jannik Sinner at the majors moving forward?
Well, I think it's a pretty short list right now, the way things are going for him, and especially his strong play on the hard courts at the slams. But I'm going to come to another young gun and slightly younger, and that's Carlos Alcaraz, who I think in our season-ending episode last year, I chose Alcaraz as my player of the year for 2024. You, I believe, if memory serves correct, went with Sinner, and I think many would have gone with Sinner. But I think Alcaraz still has, he's still evolving. He's still, not to say that Sinner isn't, but I think Alcaraz still has, more growth to go through. And Alcaraz is shown capable at, on all of the surfaces. We've seen what he's done on clay, seen what he's done on grass. So to me, I really envision those two as being the next great rivalry in men's tennis. And I'm sure there's some other players out there that would like to insert themselves into that conversation on a consistent basis, like Ben Shelton, Alex Zverev, who's done well on the court lately with his results. But really, to me, I think Alcaraz is the most likely because of his age, his confidence, and the fact that he is definitely still improving.
Yeah, I would say Alcaraz is obviously the number one at this point, especially you look at their head-to-head, and Alcaraz went 3-0 against Sinner last year. So that makes it the obvious choice. I'll make a non-obvious choice and give him a year and a half to be the guy. Maybe this is bold.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, the Brazilian João Fonseca, who I think lit up Melbourne with that first round victory over Andre Rublev, did lose in 5 sets to Lorenzo Sonego in the second round, but that was just an electrifying performance. You heard Sinner even was asked about projecting Fonseca for the rest of 2025 and said he can get inside the top 20, which at his age, he's only 18 years old, would be unbelievable to already think of him that highly. So he just has to me, the makeup and the look of a future potential world number one, someone who's going to be at the top of the game, I think, competing for slams in a couple of years' time. So that's a future pick for now. And yeah, the current one has to be, as you said, Carlos Alcaraz.
Hey, look, the next great tennis players, they're all out there, right? They're 12, they're 13, they're 14, and look out, we're going to be, learning new names in the coming years. The sport is never stagnant, that's for sure. Our next question, and I like this segment. I think this is something we're going to be instituting on a semi-regular basis this year on Matchpoint Canada. And hey, stay tuned to us moving forward, because we've got more news to be sharing in the coming weeks, and this is just one sort of change for us in 2025. Next question, it's more of a statement, but this is coming from Ryan, who says, overall great Australian Open. I'm still surprised Madison Keys won. And you know what? I think there's many people out there who are still surprised. Most of us, I'd like to think, are pleasantly surprised. And, one thing, Ben, I wanted to ask you about her victory, and Abigail mentioned it earlier, or you mentioned it earlier, that she is working with a new tennis racket. And so how much of a difference does a tennis racket make for a professional player? I mean, I know for me, as just a regular sort of hack who goes out on the weekends when he can, I'm a creature of habit. I like using the same racket. I don't like changes too much. But for professional players, are they trying new rackets at certain intervals? And how big of a difference can the stick in your hand make when you're that good of a player already?
You know what? I think it can have a substantial difference, and it might be something you're almost convincing yourself of, that it might not actually be the racket. But if you make a tweak, you make a racket change, maybe you add more weight to the head, to the handle, you change your strings, and you go on a 5-match winning streak. I think the superstition creeps in, and you almost it's all like a placebo effect. You tell yourself, I'm doing that because of this racket, and wow, I've never felt so great hitting the ball. And I think some of that kind of played in with Madison Keys. And even before the Australian Open, winning that title in Adelaide, she had some unbelievable wins. And actually, Jessica Pegula, who Keys beat in the final of that tournament, Pegula said, if Madison plays like this at the Australian Open, she's going to win the title. She was so blown away by her level in that final. And I think, of course, Keys has always been a phenomenal player. I don't think you could take someone who was never really in that conversation, hand them a new tool and it's starting to click and they're going to necessarily soar and become a completely different athlete. However, just a slight change, and we've seen it in the past. I know Roger Federer fans were bummed out about him changing head sizes at one point in his career, and it coincided. What's that?
But look what that did for him, no?
Well, there was at one point where he had a slump over changing to a smaller head frame, and then went back.
To 2017, when things clicked in.
Well, exactly. He made the racket.
Too.
Yes, so he made the racket change back, and then suddenly wins 2 majors in 2017, and is back in that conversation, dominating once again. So I do think it plays a factor the same way you do see club and rec players obsess over strings, over grips, over customization of how they like their tennis rackets. I try not to get too caught up in it, because I find if I'm thinking about that too much, I'm losing sight of my actual game.
Yeah, well, I just need a racket that's going to do it for me, and I haven't found that yet, so that's where I'm at. And I won't mention the racket I'm using that clearly isn't getting me the results, because I don't want to alienate any future potential sponsors. But
that's funny.
I think that's also a limiting thing for some professionals, is maybe they'd like to change rackets, but they're in a contract with a company for who knows how many years, and they're stuck, for lack of a better word, with with that brand.
Yeah, good point.
Hey, I do want to mention before we kind of end off with some Davis Cup chatter, but we do want to mention that Gabby Dabrowski and her partner Aaron Ratliff did have the most successful Aussie Open of any Canadians, making it to the semifinals where they lost to a very difficult tandem of Yelena Ostapenko and Shea Su Wei, the ageless wonder who, my goodness, what a wonderful doubles player. And so there's certainly no shame in that. And especially when you think what Gabby's been through over the last year and opening up about her struggles with breast cancer and how that has been something that clearly occupied a lot of her mental and physical bandwidth last spring. It's just fantastic to see that she's healthy and on the court, and that the two of them have picked up right almost where they left off, being one of the most formidable doubles tandems out there.
Yeah, I think very good result making the semifinals there. And Siniakova, Taylor Townsend win the title. Rebecca Marino will be in competition this week, I should mention, playing in Singapore. Felix Auger-Aliassime is playing in France. And we have Davis Cup qualifiers this upcoming weekend in Montreal, IGA Stadium, Canada facing Hungary. I will be there to take in the tie. Denis Shapovalov was going to be the number one in singles. However, he's just withdrawn, citing some back pain. So Gabriel Diallo, now the top-ranked Canadian. Liam Draxel's now inside the top 200. Hungary, I think a pretty tricky team. Fabian Marozhin will be there. He just had a win over Rublev to start the season. He beat Alcaraz last year. And then you have Martin Fucsovic, the veteran. So this is a tricky one.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have even been an easy one if we had Felix and Dennis there, to be honest, right? Like, it still would have been a challenge. Hey, look, I think Gabriel Diallo, he's going to be one of those players that is going to surprise a lot of people. I think a lot of players still don't know his game yet because firsthand they probably haven't faced him as he's still in the infancy of his professional career. But we saw him last February in Montreal, same courts, same stadium, same hometown crowd for him being from Montreal. And look at what he did against the South Korean team. He really carried things for Team Canada. And he's going to have to do it again for sure. I mean, who knows who they're going to slot into that number 2 spot. It's going to be someone who is not super battle tested in this area. Vasek, you would have to imagine, if he's healthy, is going to be leading the charge in doubles. Where I do think we have the advantage over Team Hungary if Vasek is, feeling good and ready to rock. But this is going to be Gabriel Diallo's team, much like it was a year ago. And I'm eager to see if he's going to be able to step up as he did at that point, too.
Yeah, we'll be eager to watch and follow, and we'll give you a full recap, guys, on our next episode. Guys, you've been watching.
Go ahead. Have a great time in Montreal.
Thank you.
Jealous. It's my hometown as well, like Gabriel Diallo. And last year I enjoyed the tennis. I enjoyed the Schwartz's smoked meat sandwiches. I enjoyed speaking French a little more often and seeing many of our tennis friends from Quebec. So, enjoy that for the both of us. We'll look forward to your recap when we continue on Matchpoint Canada next week.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Guys, we will talk to you next time.